So I think one of the things that we have all been experiencing closer home, I think all of you would have gone through this work from home. Almost everyone, all of us have been working from home. Look at the kind of impact we are seeing. Less traffic, less pollution, streams are clearer. You look out and you see the skies and the stars. I think the impact is very, very enormous. Simply by working from home, you're reducing the kind of destruction footprint that is otherwise laid out. And I think more and more companies are talking about embracing working from home on a permanent, on a longer term basis. We, for one, as an organization, are really toying with the idea. We're actually piloting to see whether some of our units can actually go permanently into work from home. Rishabh just mentioned before we started that they're already decided to get into that kind of a mode, at least to the rest of this calendar year. So it's not happening in pockets. It's probably happening across. When I talk to my colleagues and friends in the US, some of the US firms are sort of shut till summer of next year. So it's a serious thing happening, and I think all this will have a positive spin-off on work. The second area that comes to my mind again, look at travel. Deep, your area. I was just reading the May data. I believe the travel is off some 80-85% YOY in terms of passenger kilometers, and it was probably more than 90% off in the previous month. What does it mean? It means that life has been going on, and many companies have started getting into active production. So you're able to do work without actually traveling. I think many people I meet, and I meet a lot of people as a part of my work. We are able to carry out work which otherwise in the past, you physically wanted to go to Delhi and meet that person, or physically travel outside India to meet that person. I think everyone are happy to jump into a conference call, a video call like this, and carry on with their life, and it's more and more becoming acceptable. So should it not just carry on like this? Look at the kind of, while I know, Deep, it's not good for your business, but certainly it has a very big impact in terms of what it can do in terms of the environment. As consumers, I think as consumers, we can play a role. For instance, I know recently we, given what is happening in the border, there were calls taken on certain apps that cannot be used. Now, it's having an impact. If consumers decide that they want to only buy stuff from companies who are following ethical, environmental friendly policies, it can make an impact. So I think we can also force change as consumers within the company.
Sure.
So I think there are more than one ways in which we can do that going forward as practicing leaders. And I would strongly believe, as Deep just said, that this is the time. Let's not let go this crisis as a waste.
Sure.
Do something about it.
Great. I think it's great to see your optimistic note in your your remarks. I would urge our viewers to ask questions. This is your chance. You'll never get all these panelists in one place. This is really your chance. You've got 35 minutes to ask questions, but don't wait. Whatever is in your mind, please go ahead and ask. Let me move on to Rishabh from those comments of Vijay. Rishabh, you heard Sejal in her opening comments. We have seen zoonotic diseases from SARS, Ebola, H1N1, and now COVID-19. Is this the biggest crisis ever, which will force change? Will it happen that now people realize the connection between pandemics, tampering with nature and the economy, and it will force a big change? Are you optimistic?
Thank you. Hope you can hear me properly.
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
I'd like to echo what Vijay was saying right now about this whole working from home culture really has impacted sort of how we function daily. And many of us are enjoying it right now. Like I was saying before the thing started, we are going to be home until December this year. So I think it's very much allowed us to sort of relook at a business model and see how we can do it. I want to pick up on two things that one Vijay was saying and also what Sejal said in her opening remarks. So one is sort of going back to your question, what we can see is what's the kind of change we are seeing between the pandemic, the economy, and nature. So a couple of things. One is that the trends towards capitalism and nature sort of and the harmony between the two was a trend already we started before the pandemic as well. So as lawyers, we looked at this trend of ESG investing, so environmental, sustainable and business sort of practices, and how investors look at companies and reward sort of a more sustained and long-term look towards issues like climate change, responsible business, sort of taking care of the environment as part of the normal business and functioning. What we've been seeing in the realistically last 2 or 3 years, I would say, is that investors, as opposed to government, as opposed to sort of the companies themselves, are putting far more of an emphasis upon sustainable investing and the importance of nature in their business practices. And as a trend, I would say that it might get a bit hampered right now because of the pandemic. What we're seeing in the recent lockdown in the last 3 or 4 months, I would say, is that board conversations now are a bit more about health and safety, about sort of survival in this crisis right now, and not so much about long-term investment for sustainable growth. So I think you might see a short-term blip right now where environment is a bit downgrade in board agendas, and it sort of may last until the crisis, tides over, recession sort of gets over, until boards get a bit more confident about investing capital into more sort of long-term projects. But in the short term, you're going to see a bit of environmental sort of damage being done. You might see boards taking shortcuts about, getting something which is cheaper, but something which is more harmful to the environment in the business practice, in the packaging materials, in the sort of business activity. So it's going to have a short-term impact, maybe to improve profitability, but a long-term damage to the environment as a trade-off of that. But other trends I think I would sort of is that I think ESG, which I mentioned earlier, is really here to stay. So we did a seminar recently towards the end of last year or so with the head of institutional investment at BlackRock. As everybody on this business panel will know, BlackRock was our asset manager with over $1 trillion in management. And what we kind of heard from the person who votes on companies in India is that climate change is number one on the investment criteria at the moment. So in the last sort of proxy season, which happened towards the end of last year and start of this year, the kind of impression we got from it, the kind of data is showing us is that they're acting against companies who are not making climate change number one in the priority going forward. So they're voting down management, they're voting down business practices, and replacing management as well in companies who are not really cognizant of what's happening in the environment and the footprint they're leaving behind. So I kind of hope that this trend continues even after the pandemic, and sort of investors hold companies accountable for what they're doing. I think going back to what Sejal was saying about the government being responsible for this, I would kind of shift that perspective to private sector being accountable and sort of responsible towards businesses and vice versa about what should be done for sustainable business. So as a kind of lawyer and what we're seeing, giving advice and all, I would say this is a trend we're looking at in a more long-term basis.
Okay, thank you. Those are amazing comments. I want to get back to Vijay and ask him a very, very central and important question to our discussion. It's about CSR. Over the last many years, CSR has become a very important source of funding for good causes. And now companies, because health is uppermost in their mind, are looking at using CSR funds more for that. But sometimes they might forget that actually nature is the starting point of all these problems. Absolutely. How do we get nature back on the agenda for CSR contributions to companies? Do you have any thoughts around that?
Yeah. So thanks, Ninad. I think when this whole CSR concept kicked off a few years back, one of the big struggles many companies faced. Okay, now that I have set aside some money for CSR, how do I put it to use? I think that's been one of the big struggles that most enterprises started facing, because they never thought probably in a natural way like that, doing stuff which can really be put to use. Yes, there was always an intent, but it's a different thing when you set aside money, and now that you're actually putting money to work, you want to be very sure that you're dealing with something, you're doing something which is not going into a waste. It's going actually into the eventual outcome that you want to do. So that's one big struggle, practical struggle that we as enterprises face, many enterprises face. Of course, we at our end had a foundation which was actually executing and implementing, but many companies don't necessarily have a foundation route. They sort of depend on other foundations, but that's one big struggle. And having crossed that barrier, having crossed that area, I would always urge enterprises to think on an allocation approach. Yes, health is important. Yes, maybe there are other causes, old age, some other areas, children's education, livelihood support, etc. Each organization would have its very dear cause or very specific and strategic cause. I think by all means go and support it. But I think we should bring back to the table the fact that unless the environment is all in harmony and balance with with our ecosystem of existence, all this old age home,
It's all too
livelihood,
waste. Yeah.
it just has no meaning, because you
Right.
don't have a license to live otherwise. I think that's what this pandemic has really shown us. So I think it becomes so core and so central. And here I must say, we have been working with WWF, and the kind of impact that this organization has had is enormous. I think they do a lot of work in different areas, working in this specific area as well. And you can see the impact. You can actually, people travel, they go and see how the impact is happening on the ground in terms of environment, clean energy, replacing, improving lives and livelihoods without messing around with nature. I think I would strongly recommend putting aside some money on a portfolio approach.
Okay.
Do your cost,
and
but certainly
allocation.
put something out. Yeah, certainly put something out. There is enough and more to spend
Sure.
from that corpus. Put something out for environment.
Well, hopefully, your something means a major portion, and that's how I would hopefully read it. There are questions started to flow in. So, if there's something interesting, I'll take it, in the middle of our discussion. So, viewers, I'm happy to see these questions, and please keep posting. So, Deep, I want to reach out to you for one question which has come up by a panelist, Shiva. He's asking about startups and entrepreneurs. Post-COVID, are there opportunities in nature environment for startups and entrepreneurs? It could be for profit, it could be a impact also. What are your thoughts surrounding that?
Yeah, no, it's a very relevant question. I think, small businesses around the world are stressed, and particularly in travel, as Vijay rightfully called out. It's fair to say only about 10% of travel has come back, while most other businesses have come back much more. I think travel will take the longest because of just the sheer nature of the business, the interaction, etc. And of course, there are ways in bringing back travel safely, and we have been talking about those. I'm a very big proponent around testing before travel. I've been trying to convince the powers that be that that is the most important thing.
Sure.
Pre-boarding, 24, 48 hours before, rapid test, pre-boarding, various kind of options available. Goa experimented with when on arrival the test, but perhaps that's not the most effective one. So why I'm saying all of this is that we've also partnered with several thousand now hotels who we work with and made a protocol for safety precautions. We call it a My Safety program. Deloitte is actually auditing that for us. We've got a protocol out so that people can feel safe when they take these options to stay in a villa or in a remote place, wherever they feel more comfortable, driving holidays, etc. So the opportunities I see for smaller businesses in this area are to look at vacation options, options which are popularly known as B&Bs in this country, more like cottages and villas. They're all across the country. Very often they are secondary homes, but in India, there's not a very large proportion of secondary homes. There will be soon, but there are a lot of primary homes where people are actually willing to have bed and breakfast guests. And perhaps they can be helped by doing the obvious little things that you need to treat a guest.
Sure.
Protocols in place. And these are best done by actually smaller companies, which are fleet-footed, which are light and nimble, and are able to actually create a business model, act very fast, and be on the ground. See, this will not be done by a large company headquartered in Bombay, Delhi, Bangalore, because we are not there. So if you're a company that wants to work with other entrepreneurs out there, you can work in the areas of sanitation, you can work in the areas of even food supplies, etc. And people are looking for cleanliness and sanitation in all these places. So I think a lot can be done in that area, and you should definitely explore those opportunities that this crisis has thrown up.
Great words of encouragement.
So Ninad, just a couple of add-ons to this, two bits of add-ons to what we just said. I think a few years back we saw big growth of fintechs as a hot area for entrepreneurs, startups. I think this is giving an opportunity for health tech as a sector to emerge in a big way. And I think you're only limited by what you can do, bringing biology and research and marry that with technology and just scale it up. I think there will be a big opportunity. here I must say, we as a part of our work that we do, the CSR work, we have a tie-up with IIM Bangalore, and we support entrepreneurs who want to actually start something, and it's part of our employee generation sort of plan and program. So feel free, whoever wants to, if you have some startup ideas, they are the go-to people. We've supported them with funds. So it's an incubation center, and you can probably contact them there.
Great. So you can get the ideas from Deep and go to Vijay for funding. So there you are. Circle is complete. Rishabh, I want to push you to on a slightly different topic. Because of your nature of work, you do come in contact with a lot of family foundations and HNIs and people with substantial wealth. So you know how they think, what they're doing. What can be done to ensure that these foundation HNIs also see the impact of investing in nature and environment post COVID? What can we do to evangelize their or channelize the investment in nature and capital?
So I'll give you two perspectives. One is that, like you said in your introduction remarks, is that I do a lot of writing on this topic.
Right.
So last week, I put a research paper out on our firm's website about exactly the kind of question you asked right now.
Right.
Kind of pandemic right now is a golden chance opportunity for HNI to sort of be in the relationship with the NGO community at large and look at sort of patient capital being deployed in this sector. Some of the more research and data is sort of covered that, which I won't sort of bore people with today. So I would say in my experience working with family offices, even setting them up with the investment mandates for them, the incentive structures for the fund manager in family offices, I would broadly say there is not much allocation or any sort of interest being done towards environment as sort of area of investment and focus. So like Vijay was saying, you need to have sort of a bucket of investment into all these various sectors.
Right.
We are not seeing that really playing out in the family office space. The typical investment kind of portfolio approach would be in the equity market and the PE kind of universe about companies in the fintech and legal tech and tech and all those kind of startup, exciting, sexy companies, but not much in terms of green companies or green sort of being sort of sponsored by these investments. Some exceptions are there. We see a couple of companies, especially the founders, getting more involved in these kind of long-term investment structures. We've done some green bond for certain companies.
Okay.
I've done a lot of assessment for environmental impact. Many of the projects that some founders want to do separate from what the company is doing as part of its own business CSR and approach. So I would say the industry, I think it's more about raising awareness first in the founders and sort of principles of these family offices, and then sort of deploying funds into the passion areas of these founders. The good thing is that in family offices compared to companies and sort of listed universal companies is that sort of there is no sort of long-term scrutiny and sort of quarterly pressure coming on these situations about generating investments on a quarter-by-quarter basis over here. So families and offices can deploy sort of more patient capital over generations also in many cases, and build up a long-term ecosystem of companies that are sustaining and supporting to sort of do things to really change the world in a more sort of moonshot way.
Okay.
We're doing a lot of seminars on this, creating awareness, talking to founders about giving certain money to these causes as well. And one sort of passion project of mine along Ritika we are doing right now is educating the HNIs about leaving money to CSR and WWF as part of their succession plan as well.
Oh, okay. That's great.
Focus is now leaving money when you're alive and giving money as part of an ongoing donation program. You want to launch something called legacy giving as part of the new initiative. That under succession plan as part of your trust or will,
Right.
you can leave money into CSR and WWF as part of your legacy to the world. So we want to launch that also hopefully very, very soon. So we'll get back to you on this.
No, great. There are wonderful ideas. Rishabh, since I'm with you, make this response to this question a little bit crisp, because as a lawyer, you would want to speak a lot about it. It's a slightly detailed topic, but there are one or two people who have asked, and this is the draft EIA notifications have generated a lot of discussion.
Correct.
Oh, I want a quick comments. We can have a half a day seminar, but I have got just, let's say, 2 minutes comments because you're talking of nature and natural capital. What are your quick comments?
I'll give you a 1 minute answer because
Okay.
the nature of my practice that I do. I don't do environmental law as an active part of my portfolio, but I spoke to my colleagues who handle this on my project finance and sort of development team. What are their observations and their thoughts on that? So the quick comment I would say is that at least a little bit I saw the law and spoke to people is that it's a very horribly drafted, one-sided, sort of undemocratic law that's come out right now. with sort of the focus on government sort of being controlling everything, no accountability to decisions taken by the EC approval, sort of no ability for people like you or me to question what's happening in a project and holding the management accountable for that. I think it's gone the other way right now, sort of empowering the private sector to pretty much do what they want in this law, and sort of environmental damage is completely downgraded right now in the list of issues to look at. So the good thing is that the law is still open for public comments today until I think August 11th or so.
That's right, 11th August.
That's right. So in case anybody in this audience wants to comment on that, now is the time to do so. Because if the law goes through in the current form it is today, I think the environment in India is pretty much finished. If companies can do what the law lets them do unless you a notification today, I think we're going to see a lot of damage being caused because of it. But sort of being a lawyer, I'll give you the other corporate side of it as well. We spoke to clients also about this approach, and their views that it was fantastic for business right now. Sort of part of Modi's sort of initiative of doing business in India, making life a lot easier. We are pretty happy with the single window clearance coming out now. Sort of once approval comes, you can't re-question any approvals given in the past. The penalty sort of numbers are very, very low and sort of not very scary for many companies at all. So the private sector is pretty happy with the law is kind of shaped out. But from us in WWF right now, I think we're going to be quite terrified if the law comes into the force it is today.
So great. I think it's good you have given both sides of the perspective and in a very succinct manner. So yes, I mean, I'm glad you encouraged your viewers. You should comment whatever you view either way. August 11th is the last date. These are probably notifications which will significantly impact all of us in the short term and long term. So whatever views you have, please do put them. Deep, I want to come back to you. There's a question from Shalini. She's a viewer. She said CSR is good. It's important. Companies should invest in nature from CSR, but shouldn't nature and environment be part of the business strategy of a company, not just funding?
Yeah, I think it's a very evolved view. Shalini, you're absolutely right. And I think at some point of time that will happen here more core. I think it's important right now I think the European Commission has made a very interesting, Sejal will correct me if I'm wrong, but they have actually said, this is the European Alliance for Green Recovery. They've actually said that we are not going to take again an or approach. They are saying that there's a large number of policymakers as part of it, but they are not looking at it as being either environment or business. They're saying it's environment and business. And that was fascinating. And that's the sign of, I guess, a very evolved economy. And hopefully, that will go beyond. I think some companies out here are looking at it seriously, especially companies who, again, have realized the long-term impact of taking care of environment in places where they have their people, they have production facilities, etc., and they've integrated very well. Undoubtedly, Taj comes to mind or Tata's come to mind. They've done a very good job. Several other corporates are also looking at it. For travel, it's even more relevant. I think if there was ever a time for ecotourism or sustainable tourism to really take off and be appreciated, it's now. Today, it's become a need. Till yesterday, it was still the passion of a few, and that's pretty much what it was in India. But today, it's a need. Everyone wants to actually take a break in a remote place, be in touch with nature, because fundamentally they want to be away from other people. But I think we're also realizing that those kind of holidays are probably going to be more common going forward. This is not a one-off. This health crisis, unfortunately, could get repeated, and probably will get repeated, is what we're hearing in our lifetime, and even with shorter cycles. And therefore, the more we will take care of our environment as a travel business, as a tourism business, as any business, I think we'll be better off. So definitely, it's a great point, Shalini, and I think we can pick up very good points from what is happening in other parts of the world, particularly in this case, what Europe is doing.
Great, thanks, Deep. Let me come back to Vijay, since you're in the financial services industry. Maybe, is there a way to measure return on investment in natural capital as a country? We have GDP, then we have gross national happiness. Is there some other measure? Is there something which you can think of, someone doing it?
So, I just want to respond to that by actually continuing on what Deep just mentioned and Shalini's question on ingraining environment and ingraining nature as a part of business. Actually, I think it's little not very well known. There is something which is called the ESG framework. What it stands for is environment, society, and governance. I think Rishabh touched upon it when he spoke. The concept is very simple. When companies operate, don't just look at one metrics, which is return to shareholders, but look at business in a more holistic manner. How to integrate society, how to integrate, and so all the stakeholders, employees, customers, partners, and so on and so forth. How to integrate nature and environment, and how to do that with the best governance practices. So this is a framework which has been created, and many companies have now started embracing it. And under that framework, you do exactly what Shalini has said. Every year, you have to actually give a report card. How have you been able to report, sort of address stuff in each of these areas? And what we are also seeing is that institutional money is now going into them on a preferred basis. Funds have been created, and their objective is to only invest and provide capital. So there is actually economic interest in doing stuff that Shalini touched upon. In India, as at recent times, we have 88 companies which have actually embraced this. We have embraced it as well as ICICI Securities. Many companies like us have also done it. The total count is 88 on the top 100. So they do follow norms, frameworks around the environment, ingraining that in part of business. Having said that, coming specifically to the point that you said, how can you measure? To my mind, again, it's not straightforward. It's not easy, because you're dealing with something where the impact, it becomes very difficult to quantify. How do you really measure? So I think movement into this zone is going to happen, and it's already happening by the dent of a call taken by a leader. That yes, I do believe there is going to be positive impact and outcome as a consequence of investing. It's a kind of a gut feel. It's a leap of faith. It's linking what you observe, and then you take a call and you put money to commitment to that cause. That's how it's going to start. That's how it has started, and that's how I feel it will continue for a while. I'm very sure that the accountants will jump into the fray, because at some point in time, the leaders' whims cannot be indiscriminately carried on. It has got to be sort of calculated back and converted into a financial outcome. So I think there are attempts being made, very rudimentary and preliminary at this stage, to try and quantify the benefits of what could be the impact of an investment in environment. Some of it just becomes so tough to sort of translate it. So I think it is going to, it's early days, nascent stages. It's going to evolve, and my sense is that maybe a few years from now, the maturity, the sort of collective wisdom of people around the community will make it more refined, make it more sophisticated, because at the end of the day, the accountant is going to say that yes, this is what we got in terms of returns. But I think it's very, very preliminary at this stage.
Okay, very nascent.
Investments will be led by a leader's call.
Sure. So viewers, we have exactly 10 to 15 minutes left. So if you have your question, this is probably your last chance. Please ask. There are a lot of questions, and if I may, there's a question which probably Sejal can answer. It's a very specific question. Arjun Singh is asking, and maybe you can give a quick response. He's saying that sustainable harvesting of non-timber forest products for increasing livelihoods for rural communities, will it help in decreasing deforestation?
So it can do both. It can help in decreasing deforestation. It can also increase pressures on forests. And it all depends, like everything else, on what is the system and the regulation that is being followed to do it. So it's certainly a very important source of livelihood for forest dwelling communities. And I think it can definitely be improved upon, and we can actually build this as a future livelihood strategy. But it would require those kinds of regulations to be put in place that will ensure sustainable harvesting. So yes, I would say it's important, but it requires sustainability mechanisms to be built in.
Okay, sustainability mechanisms to be built in. There is a question, Palak, sorry, Deep from Palak, and I'll come to you, Rishabh, after Deep. It's a long question. Let me paraphrase. He's saying that there's so many plastic products. There are, in Tetra Pak and all the other ways, and there are harmful chemicals. And if you go to buy the non-harmful variety, which is good for the nature, let's say organic others, the cost is double. What is the way out? How do you change consumer behavior? Can government do anything to change this behavior?
Yeah, absolutely. And even before that, I want to thank Vijay for telling us about ESG. That's very relevant. We are going to be looking up on it for sure. I think, what you're saying, Palak, is absolutely a place where we can see legislature play a very big role. These changes are necessary. They are pretty hard to do if there are economic incentives that are given for them. And if we don't do them, the consequences are draconian. I'd like to share something we did recently, in fact, just before COVID crisis. I think one of the last interesting work trips I had was to the Andamans, where we had been observing as a company that it's a very, very fragile ecosystem, and plastic left behind on the beaches getting into the water was really ruining the ecosystem. So we decided to do something about it. Did a lot of studies, spoke to the local authorities, got a lot of support from the authorities, and finally we were able to build what we went to Havelock Island to start with. We were able to set up water ATM. So we wanted to really understand how do we nip this problem at its real root. How do we do that? Otherwise, there's no point. You can keep on supplying, water in glass bottles, things like that, but that doesn't solve the problem. Plastic is still the cheapest way to transport water, and people are thirsty. They need that, of course. So we set up water ATMs. There was thankfully good groundwater there. We worked again very closely with Tata Trust, Tata Chemicals, who do this, and there are three of them which have been put up at Havelock Island, and we got space which was given to us by the Panchayat. A lot of work had to be done, but a lot of support. And now there is a perfectly viable and a better substitute. And we actually give bottles to our customers, which are reusable bottles on the ferry when they're coming across, so that they can use it. They can, refill it out here and stay away. Now there is no need for plastic bottles to come in. Now I understand an island in the Andamans is very unique. How do you do this in mainland? And how do you do it in other places? This is where we need legislation to play a role. And by the way, some of it has happened. So the most dangerous kind of plastic is the thin. So the really dangerous were the bottles, which were the tiny 100 ml bottles, which have now been banned in many places. The moment you move to larger bottles, it means thicker plastic, which means they can be reused actually. So that has started to happen, but it's even more severe. Just like Bombay saw, and I'm sure all of you based in Bombay would recall 4 or 5 months ago, they finally banned poly bags. And the reason
Right.
for them was the city got choked. All the drains were choked with the poly bags that were thrown in. And they realized this is a complete disaster. So I think we need to put the pressure. Our job if I can say, not only WWF, but all the companies, is to make very cogent arguments and give alternatives. You can always go about saying ban this, which is great, but then what's the alternative? There are a lot of people who are actually, built their livelihoods around what is current. So you think through a plan and then present it in a cogent manner, which I think lawmakers are definitely willing to look at. I think, environment has changed itself for how people are looking at long-term.
Thanks, Deep. So, viewers, this is the last 5 minutes of our conversation. So, if you want to crash in a question, this is your chance. Let me get to Rishabh, and then we'll start winding down our proceedings with some summary conclusions. But viewers, please do ask a question, and I'll try and see if any of the panelists can respond. So, Rishabh, is this a moment for corporate specifically and individuals, an opportunity to make up for the past omissions which we have? So we have reached here today, the crisis, as Sejal mentioned in the opening comments, because of how we have tampered with nature. Is this a chance to reset for all of us?
After discussing this with my wife a little bit earlier, is sort of who's really responsible for what's happened right now and what can be done about this. And sort of what I really found resonated with me is how we can kind of weaponize the youth to be responsible and accountable for this. So I was very fascinated by this whole story of Greta Thunberg, who sort of took our collective imagination last year and what she could do at her age to sort of hold countries accountable for what they've done. I think the kind of credibility you get from a 60-year-old talking about climate change and what they have done and not done to sort of damage the environment is not as impactful as having somebody younger in a generation, sort of my daughter's 2.5 and what she's going to be seeing in the future coming up, in the world of business, is sort of not as impactful as having somebody younger and more passionate driving climate change and these kind of conversations right now. So I think the turning point has happened, as sort of you were saying earlier, is that people are now more aware of what's really happening, what they're responsible for. But I think we need more action being taken from the younger side of things, not really sort of people in entrenched management today, generations 1 and 2 kind of after them as well. So as more and more of our children join business and more of sort of companies are looking at succession, I think we have to build in sustainability and sort of climate and all these issues as part of the sort of ongoing work streams over there. It can't be done by what's the sort of mindset and the space today. We're going to have a bit of a reset right now, like I was saying earlier, because kind of companies are more fighting for survival right now and sort of not deploying capital to whether it needs to go to. But I think if you look at it on a long-term horizon, next couple of years, 5 years, 10 years or so, I think you will see a resetting of that old blip as well going away. So I would give it a more long-term horizon. I would expect my daughter and beyond to look at this issue and kind of fix the solution, and not really people who are really in the world of business today. So I take a very long generational view on this issue of climate and sustainability.
Great, lot of hope in the young. Very good. How old is your daughter, Rishabh?
And she's a very enthusiastic on the environment, right?
Very good. Excellent, excellent.
Pandas are a favorite. She loves my logo on the WWF t-shirt with the panda. She's very much the next activist for WWF, I think.
Right. So great. I think I'll start winding down. It was great. And before we finally close, each one of you have to give a one-line message to corporates and to individual, or just one line. We had a fascinating discussion. Sejal mentioned how we have reached here. Rishabh, connected a lot of dots, has a lot of confidence in the youth and how they will make a difference. Deep was more general about, specifically about travel also. He mentioned a couple of ideas. And he also spoke about how corporates need to embrace it as part of the strategy. And Vijay made a lot of points, including the point of how you should have allocation within CSR for nature, and a very, very passionate, passionately spoke about how the importance of allocating funds within CSR and companies for nature. Sejal, you want to provide any quick closing comments before each of them has to give one-liner message to corporate and one-liner message to individuals? What can we do? Before Vijay, Sejal has to just make some quick closing comments, and then I'll come to you.
I'll say two things. As you said, one message to corporates, one message to individuals. The first thing I think we need to do is we need to break this false narrative that development and the environment cannot go hand in hand. That's a completely false narrative. And I think that it's up to the youth, and I think I agree with Rishabh, that youngsters in this country need to step up and challenge this notion. And today they're not. Today there's still a lot of young people who feel that they do not go hand in hand. We must consume as much as we want. You guys are anti-development. So I still get a lot of that. So I think one important thing is that the young people in this country have to step up and break this false narrative, because then governments will listen. In terms of corporates and businesses, I have three main things. One is that it is time for corporates and the responsible corporates in this country to lead the way, to really step up and lead the way and do three main things. One is change your model. Change your model so that environment and conservation becomes part of your business model and not something separate. The second is invest in nature, seriously invest in nature. And the third is reduce your own footprint. Okay. So be very careful about where you are citing your businesses, how you're operating. Be responsible about your own footprint. I think if businesses and responsible companies do this, we can take the rest along. But this really time that we step up on this front. Otherwise, we're still talking about a handful of companies, and the same handful of companies each and every time. We need to change that. Thank you.
Great. So great. Over to Vijay. He was very enthusiastic. Come on, Vijay. One-liner for corporate, one-liner for individuals.
I would just say for corporates, please set aside money for nature, and please use WWF, they do a great job. You can see the outcomes. For individuals, I would simply say that please embrace, don't underestimate that you cannot make a difference. You can make a difference, and saving environment, saving nature starts from you. So please exhibit, a green behavior, if I can use that word, in everything that you do, and you will realize that you're actually influencing quite substantially as a combined force.
Fantastic, fantastic. I'll come to Deep last since I started with him. So maybe Rishabh can one-liner for corporates, one-liner for individuals.
I was just writing it down. So for individuals, the one-liner I would say was that start asking tough questions to the companies that you invest in and hold them accountable for issues on climate change and the environment. Second point for the corporates, I would say that push that to the powers that be in Delhi and beyond, and don't allow the EIA to pass in the form it is today.
Okay, there you are. Rishabh has given his point of view on EIA, but whatever it is, I would still urge people to just put their comments, whatever your thoughts. Deep, you're the man to finally say it all. You've heard everything. You have to say something beyond all this. One-liner each.
I wanted to say listen to Sejal, but no, most of the points have been said, but I'd like to tell corporates that, leverage your resources. So sometimes we tend to forget that how much sway we have over. So in terms of, let's say in our case, I'll give you a wonderful example and that will explain. So we've serviced about 45 million customers till now. We have big platforms where we have people coming and buying something small. So we launched a few years ago, actually over a decade ago now, a simple thing like setting your carbon footprint when you travel and giving people the opportunity to donate a little bit of money which went towards an NGO for planting trees. Very proud to say that that number has crossed 1.1 million trees, which has come from our customers. We have matched it as much as we could, but we can't go beyond a certain amount. We have a budget, I think, for CSR, but we couldn't. So we were leveraging our platform. Similarly, my friend at Book My Show takes 1 or 2 rupees, which he calls, but he gives it to the Smile Foundation. So I think there are many things we can do in travel. Of course, there's a footprint, but how can you make it, as Sejal said, as less as possible? So you need to think about that. And if I can leave everyone with one thought, it's walk the talk. I think, you've got to set the example. You can do that as corporate citizens. You can also do that as individuals. So, start actually leading, setting the example. And it starts at the top in companies. If you don't do it, others won't do it. And this is something which I think Vijay put it very well. Like you've got to be having around this quotient and this measurement metric all the time. This has to become part of the DNA of all the decisions. There's always a better way. There is always a better way. So sorry for rambling, but not being succinct.
No, thank you, Deep. There's always a better way. Is the right way to end this 1 hour discussion. I've thoroughly enjoyed participating, moderating this fantastic panelist. We covered a huge ground. I would also urge that you follow WWF on their social media page. You can see what is happening. They are very active on their website. As a first step, as soon as this is done, go and like their page and follow it. You'll get into it. And of course, each one of the panelists has given very specific ideas. Thank you, Vijay. Thank you, Deep. Thank you, Rishabh, for joining this conversation. Thank you, Sejal, for organizing this wonderful webinar. Let the conversation begin. Let's walk the talk. And thank you, viewers, for taking your time to listen to this fascinating topic. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.